Order, good afternoon and welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. Today our evidence session is on black homelessness, and this afternoon we're taking evidence in person and virtually from Polly Stevens, Head of Policy Impact and Partnerships at New Horizon Youth Centre, Danielle, Celeste, teacher, researcher and theatre practitioner, Off the Wall Players, and Henri, Baptiste, down the line, co-founder, board member and Pathway Housing Solutions. Welcome to you three, and I want to welcome our very special guest, the chair of the MHLC Select Committee, Flo Eshalomi. Very, very welcome to join the Women and Equalities Select Committee today. If we're going to go around and ask questions, different members will ask questions. If there is anything that you think I want to go into a longer answer on, or you've got loads of data that you want to talk through, then please just follow it up in an email with us, okay? Because we have 2 panel sessions today. So I'm going to hand over first to my colleague Rachel.
Thank you, Chair. And it's great to see so many people here at the committee today who have an interest in this topic. Excuse me, I'm struggling with my voice, I think as many of us are after Christmas. So my first question, I'll come to you first, Henri, if I may. Can you tell us broadly about the problems faced by young black homeless people?
I think for me, the obvious manifestation of homelessness is rough sleeping, and that is a stereotypical, homogenous kind of a homelessness situation that society is used to. In terms of youth homelessness, young people experience a range of trauma, a range of issues in relation to abuse at home. It could be they fled home because of abuse at home. It could be that they fled home because of family breakdown matters. But also we have a high percentage of young people who are leaving the care leaving system. So from our experience, what we're finding is there's a range of social but also economic factors, including changes in the welfare system that have impacted on young people. We found that young people tend to be what's described as hidden homeless, so they're not necessarily showing up in statutory figures, and they're finding informal ways of addressing their homelessness situation. Some of those that we've come across have been young females who are entering into inappropriate relationships, essentially just to have a roof over their heads. So that's we're currently undertaking a small study on youth homelessness at the moment as well, which is starting to gather some more data around youth homelessness. But what we're experiencing is that young black people particularly experience a range of intersectionalities as well that have a wider impact on what is already a vulnerable group.
Thank you.
Just to quickly add to that as well, there is an issue in terms of young people who then subsequently go on to find accommodation, and the issue of cuckooing, which is becoming more and more prominent.
Thank you. Thanks, Henri. And just to follow on from some of the issues that you touched on there, I'd like to come to you, Polly. How do other protected characteristics like gender, sexuality, disability, transgender identity affect a person's experience of being black and homeless?
So what we consistently see in our services is that over half of the young people we've worked with for over half a decade come from black communities from a variety of different backgrounds. What we see for a lot of those young people is them being adultified when they're trying to access statutory services or having discriminatory experiences at the hand of services like the police, who are often one of the main people that people who are forced to sleep rough interact with. In terms of intersecting identities underneath that, about half the young people that we saw that were disabled in the last year were from black communities. We see a lot of autism, undiagnosed autism, ADHD, a lot of mental health needs that are either not being met for cultural reasons or not being met because of language barriers. We increasingly work with a very big refugee and asylum seeker cohort, and they face enormous barriers when trying to access services across the board, as well as a greater risk of discrimination and harm when forced to sleep rough or experiencing other forms of homelessness. Anything specific come up around sexuality with particularly young black people? We do see some of that, and I'd be happy to send some evidence from some of the partner organisations like Equalities and Stonewall Housing that we work with. I can send that in a note. We do see about 5% of the young people that we're working with identify as LGBTQ, but also often there's a lack of cultural competency within services for young people to trust them enough to disclose things like that. We do see that increasingly young black women, as Henri said, presenting at services and overrepresented in domestic violence services. For example, in Camden alone, 46% of the people accessing women's shelters are from black communities, which for a community of only 14% cross city is a wild overrepresentation. And then there's also particular barriers within those services as well, particularly statutory services around cultural competencies, understanding of faith, understanding of language barriers, all that kind of stuff also.
Thank you. And then I'll come on to you, Danny. What additional safety concerns do black people face when sleeping rough, and why do you think that is?
So one of the additional safety concerns is disproportionate criminalisation and an increased interaction with the criminal justice system, which poses a direct safety risk. So, for example, black people are significantly more likely to be arrested under like the Vagrancy Act, which criminalises rough sleeping. So more than 4,000 people were arrested under the Vagrancy Act in the last 5 years, and black people were more likely to be targeted. And according to some research done by Generation Rent, they found that 8% of arrests under the Act, which criminalises rough sleeping and begging, between 2008 and 2022, 8% of these arrests were black people. So that's higher than the ethnic group's proportion of the general population, which is 4%, and more than England's rough sleeping population of 5%. So that's one of the increased risks. So there's increased risk of violence and abuse, which rough sleepers face anyway by members of the public. But black people may face the added layer of racially motivated attacks from members of the public. So, yeah, those are two things that I thought were quite important.
Can I add to that?
Yes.
Right, from the research that we've done, we acknowledge there's an increasing number of black people that are sleeping rough, but the wider homelessness population, or the rough sleeping population, is roughly about 6% of the total homelessness population. And what our statistics are showing is that mainstream services that are commissioned to deliver services to rough sleepers aren't necessarily, or by standard, collecting data on the ethnic profile of the groups that they're coming into contact with. And what we're finding is there's a lower number of BME people that are represented in rough sleeper figures. And part of that, I think, is the way in which the data is collected. And also what contributes to that is the ability of those institutions or organizations that are commissioned to deliver those services, their ability to actually reach people from BME communities. And the case studies that we have, because we ran a rough sleeper project, well, the case studies that we had was that where we were able to reach people in places where these services weren't entering into. So I think whilst the question is geared towards what their experiences might be, I think there's also a question there about whether or not rough sleeper services are actually meeting the needs of underserved communities.
Thank you, that's helpful. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Rachel. Kevin.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Henri. That actually leads very neatly into what I was about to ask next, which was really looking into housing provision in the social sector, the private sector, and services that support people. Can you just tell me about the kinds of discrimination that black people face across social housing and private housing, but also homelessness services themselves?
That's a broad question. Obviously, I'm going to have to provide you with something in addition to this oral presentation. I mean, the reality is that black people are facing discrimination across the whole sector, the housing market sector, statutory homeless services provision. It's quite a generic response you're going to get. But our experience is that even included in terms of access to the private rented sector, they're discriminated in that sector essentially because of the right to work. That is a challenge. There are people who who tend not to trust the system, statutory homelessness system. There are also structural discrimination in terms of access to statutory homelessness services. So I'm giving you quite a generic response. And I think really to give credence to the question, what I'd much rather do is provide you with a more detailed written response.
That'd be incredibly helpful. Thank you, Henri.
Thank you.
And Danny, just building on that, really. I mean, how easy is it for people facing these systems to actually challenge any discrimination that they encounter?
Well, it's quite difficult. Sorry, I'm just going to go to my notes on that question. I thought there'd be another question. Just a second. So on my notes, so challenging discrimination black people face across social housing, private renting and homeless services in the UK. It's possible, but extremely difficult in practice. Although there's legal protections exist under the Equality Act, the burden of proving discrimination falls entirely on the individuals. So often at a time when they're in crisis, lack resources or fear jeopardising their housing options. And often the discrimination is subtle and covert, not overt, and takes the form of things like gatekeeping, harsher eligibility decisions, or being quietly deprioritised, making it hard to evidence. In the private rented sector, landlords can object to applications without explanation, allowing racial bias to operate unchecked. Complaints mechanisms in social housing and homelessness services are often not robust. So with organisations largely left to investigate themselves, and often when black people facing homelessness are reluctant to complain to the same services and organisations that they've experienced discrimination and racism. Structural policies also make discrimination harder to challenge. Right to rent has been shown to encourage racial profiling, while no recourse to public funds limits the rights of many black migrants to seek help or challenge unfair decisions. So there's poor ethnicity data, it seems, across housing systems that further obscure patterns of discrimination and prevents accountability. And the regulator for social housing focuses mainly on governance and safety and not day-to-day discriminatory practice.
Obviously, challenging that kind of hidden or cryptic discrimination is very hard and can be very stressful. So I can see some of the stresses that will cause on people. But how does challenging and experiencing this sort of discrimination impact on people's health and their well-being?
So in terms of, I think that's another question that is quite wide, and maybe some more evidence will be sent in writing about that. But I think the mental health impacts are significant and I think have been well documented. So being repeatedly denied housing and treated unfairly by landlords, facing gatekeeping from councils can lead to chronic stress, anxiety, depression and trauma. The uncertainty of unstable housing or the fear of homelessness can create a constant state of vigilance that harms emotional well-being. Experiences of racism themselves are recognised as a health stressor, and housing discrimination adds another layer of harm. I've got lots of notes on this, so maybe I send them in writing, because there's quite a lot, I think.
Please do, yeah, absolutely.
And before you jump in, is there an example or a specific example that you can remember that is so stark that you could share with the committee that would help us, I think, really get to the heart of this? Danny, have you got one?
In terms of discrimination?
Yeah, in terms of discrimination.
I can talk about...
Henri, it's all right. No, it's right. Danny, have you got one?
Yeah, so I can talk about a research project that I worked on in 2014 with Crisis called No One Turned Away. And although it's 10 years ago, on working on more recent research projects, the findings are quite similar. So I don't know if you know anything about No One Turned Away, but it's essentially like a mystery shopping research project. So I was one of the people who was a mystery shopper. So I was sent to 18 different authorities nationally. And out of the 18 housing option services, I would say 4 of them didn't discriminate,
Wow.
that I could say. So some of the things that were said to me were things like, in one housing option services, I was waiting in line, and I'd been there since 8 o'clock outside and then inside. And then at 1 o'clock, just as I was going, well, before 1 o'clock, about 1:45, just as I was going to be seen, they pulled the shutters down and said, "You're too black to be seen right now, so you have to come back tomorrow." Another place, I was left waiting until around 4 o'clock, having been there from 8. And I was told to go to a local phone box and do a reverse call and given a number to call. Another place, I was told to go and speak to the men sitting on the wall outside, and they'll help me with housing. And another place I was told that you can't just come here and expect to get a house. We have to house the people who are white people here first. So those are a couple of...
And they're from local authorities?
Local authorities. And there was one other experience that I'll quickly say, where I was there in a housing options services, and some of my colleagues happened to be there on the day who were white. Obviously, we couldn't talk to each other because, you know, and their experience was completely different from mine. So my experience culminated in, again, waiting there from 9 o'clock, and roughly around 4:45, 5:30, I was told by the lady who was dealing with me that, "Don't worry, they're going to house me." And in the corner of my eye, I saw 4 policemen come into the housing option service, and also a van, mental health. So I thought, oh my gosh. So I asked to go to the toilet, went to the toilet, and quickly put a jacket on and, you know, changed my appearance, and took out the letter that I had, because I asked for a letter just in case anything goes wrong, to show them, you know, what I was doing. And then magically everything was fine. But if I had indeed been aggressive, because that's what they said, why the police were called, or I had been exhibiting real kind of mental health, then I'm sure that they would have stayed. Yeah. Because it doesn't matter whether I'm being a mystery shopper or not, if I'm displaying those things, that's needed, isn't it? But obviously I wasn't. So then it all kind of magically went away. So those are some examples I can tell you that are, obviously I experienced them, but they're more kind of objective and not subjective.
Thank you, Danny. Henri, and I'll hand back to Kevin.
Yeah, for me, I think the issue of housing inequality and homelessness is not just about kind of conscious and unconscious bias, but it's also about systemic discrimination and structural discrimination, institutional bias. And so that's very much about policies and practices and systems that are put in place that inadvertently discriminate and create barriers and challenges for particular community groups, particular minority community groups. And for me, that is a real issue within this as well, because that's very much about how policies are designed and implemented that inadvertently, but their impact is essentially is that certain groups are disproportionate, we receive a disproportionate service. So for me, I think whilst there's weight that we need to add to the argument of conscious biases, unconscious bias here, and discriminatory practices, and even the design of policy, or the fact that policy is not always inclusive in its design or consultation process, that is a factor that has to be considered within this inquiry as well, because those actions there also limit opportunities to affordable housing or safe and stable accommodation.
Thanks, Henri. Kevin?
No, thank you. That's...
Thank you. Kim?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you everyone for coming this afternoon. You've done an amazing job so far of highlighting that there is clearly a problem here. I suppose, building on from what Henri just said, let's try and have a look at the solutions. So if you were looking at the government's recently announced national plan to end homelessness, specifically with regards to reducing the excess risk of homelessness faced by black people, how would you evaluate what that plan looks like? Maybe a contribution from everybody would be great. Maybe starting with you, Polly, if that's okay.
Sure. So we were pleased to see that the National Plan to End Homelessness does have a focus on prevention. We've said for a long time that youth homelessness interventions are one of the most powerful prevention tools we have across the board. The government's own data shows that over half of entrenched rough sleepers in later life first experience homelessness under the age of 25. And what we also see from almost 60 years of frontline delivery is interventions at that point can meaningfully end homelessness for good for those people. And with us working primarily with young people from black communities, it also is one of the most powerful tools that we have to tackle black homelessness. Whilst we were pleased to see that there was a subsection that recognised young people as a distinct group, there wasn't a lot about how that might intersect with certain racial backgrounds. And a lot of the recommendations specifically for young people were more around things like the Homelessness Code of Guidance or a toolkit, and not as much about tangible housing. I think our disappointment with that sits in the fact that what we say often is young people do need a specific service. It's never going to be appropriate to put a 19-year-old who's only ever lived at home in a shared hostel with lots of people in their 30s and 40s. Similarly, we see that young people often need supported housing because they're not ready to move straight into independent living, but there are a lot of barriers to that created by multiple things, including the more recent Supported Housing Regulatory Oversight Act. Similarly, what we see for young people is they are financially discriminated against, so they are given less benefits. They are not eligible for single accommodation rate, which if you are a person with certain lived experiences, for example, sexual violence or certain mental health needs, it's not going to be appropriate for you to go into an HMO or a shared home, but they are barred by their age from being able to access that. And a lot of our young people, as it was said earlier, family breakdown is the biggest cause for youth homelessness. So not getting the same amount of benefits and housing is given under the assumption that you have a family network to make up the difference and you can afford to survive on that. If I'm a young person living in London with no access to a family network and I'm given a lower rate of every form of benefit, how on earth am I supposed to navigate that system? So I think we'd like to see more about that, and I think my question would be to the Minister and this committee is about, we know that 18% of homelessness presentations at councils are under 25s and that 8 to 10% of all people recorded sleeping rough in London are under 25s. Would it be fair that we ring fence the resources that the government gives to the housing crisis and prevention pathways to the same extent? Would we be willing to ring fence 8 to 18% of our services for this prevention that evidence shows us really works?
That's really helpful, thank you. So good that prevention is talked about, trying to get in there at an early stage. But also you'd probably like to see a bit more about young people specifically, and a bit more, I guess, from what you said about young black people specifically as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. Danielle, do you want to say your evaluation of the strategy?
So the government's cross-departmental homeless strategy gives very limited attention to the specific needs of black people and other ethnic minority groups. Unlike other at-risk groups who receive detailed sections and tailored recommendations, the strategy includes only a brief paragraph acknowledging that ethnic minority communities face additional barriers, such as discrimination, language challenges, and the lack of culturally appropriate services. Although it notes emerging evidence on the role of racism in homelessness, it offers not really concrete actions, funding commitments or plans to address these disparities.
Okay, I'll come back to you, but maybe about what you might like to see. Henri, do you want to do a bit of an evaluation overall?
Yeah, I mean, just a number of points. One for me is there is a fund attached to the new homelessness strategy, and let me see if I can just quickly find it on my notes. Yeah, is it the Ending Homelessness in Communities Fund, working with the voluntary community and faith sector? And for me, I think part of that is recognising that particular groups are facing challenges, and that maybe there should be a consideration for ring fencing some of that funding so that it's targeted at particular communities whose needs aren't being met by existing homelessness provision. But there's also a broader, rather than echoing what others have said, there's a broader agenda, and one of that is around the support, social and affordable housing program. And within that, it talks about community-led housing. And for me, community-led housing is a vehicle for addressing homelessness. And I think it's looking at other strategies and policies that can support addressing the issue of Black homelessness. And I believe that the SAP has it within its remit to do that. I also think the new devolved authorities and mayoral authorities who are going to be developing homelessness strategies and housing strategies, how does that kind of transition itself and translate it? Or how will they translate themselves into ways in which they'll be developing strategies and indicators that address homelessness within particular communities? So actually having targets and outcomes achieved as part of that through the work that is going to be taken on by these new authorities. The local government reorganisation provides additional opportunities as well, and it's whether or not we can embed this conversation around race and homelessness within those discussions. So, and I think another kind of key factor that's come up for us is the misalignment between local housing strategies and homelessness strategies. They tend to be designed and produced separately, maybe with reference to each other, but I would like to see more cohesion between housing strategies and homelessness strategies. I know that sits outside it somewhat of the question that you asked, but for me, I think there's a broader conversation here about how, if you're talking about government in general, how government in general can respond to some of these. Another point I think for me that we've acknowledged is the loss of social housing, and the loss of public assets. And we're about to launch a campaign that shouts out and calls for more ethical disposal of social housing. What I mean by that is the loss of housing association or the sale of housing association properties to the market, which has an impact on the net additionality of new housing. And for me, I think that's a key question to ask. And even building on that, the liberation of recycled grants that's used by housing associations. Again, there's a number of things that I want to bring forward, but I'll put that in the form of an email.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Henri. That was really comprehensive. Just to finish off then, maybe a final thought from all three of you in terms of what might not be in the plan that you'd like to see in the plan. Does it worry you that there isn't much reference to race or racism in the plan? And also, is there anything else that you think could be added? You've made some really valuable points in terms of what does this look like from a devolution perspective? Is there a way of ring-fencing money? Housing and homelessness should be a bit more joined up. I think that's a criticism that government faces on many subjects. It's not always very joined up in its thinking. So thank you for that, Henri. So anything else that you might like to see in the strategy, and any concerns about the lack of reference to race or racism? I'll go in reverse order. I'll go to you, Henri, first of all, and then come back round.
Yeah, I think one of the key things, I mean, I sit on the APPG ending homelessness as well. And what is stark is that the subject of Black homelessness, for me, is cross-cuts or APPGs. And I'm wondering, I suppose this is a question for you guys, is whether or not the findings and recommendations from this inquiry will be shared with them to inform their conversations going forward.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
If there's one thing that you wanted from me, that would be it right now. I had everything else to an email, yeah?
Yeah, that's really helpful. Yeah, joining the dots is really important, and the chair's nodding, which is a positive sign, Henri. So thank you for that. Danielle, any last points from you?
Some of the things, recommendations. So maybe restoring local housing allowance so it covers at least the cheapest third of local rents. Improving welfare support to reflect real living costs and avoid disadvantaging low-income households. I think that was said before. Also, in terms of the, I've forgotten the name now, the duty to collaborate, requiring public services to work together to prevent homelessness. I think it would be really great if some Black lived experience people could be part of that in terms of building something new that comes straight from like the ground up and can work with local authorities to ensure that their concerns and their experiences feed right into this new strategy. some of the other recommendations. I think probably like anti-racism training and guidance for housing and homelessness services, improving ethnicity data collection and using it. I think that's really important. Yeah, I think everything else maybe I send in writing.
That's brilliant. That's really comprehensive. Thank you very much. And Polly, anything to add?
No, I would agree with everything you said. I don't think you can come into any single frontline homelessness service in the UK and say that it's not a race issue. It just absolutely is. Come to our data anytime. You're very welcome, and you will see that that is the truth. I think we could go further to recognise that, the structural and institutional racism that in the way that we have with other statutory services, and it would be nice to see that more recognised in government homelessness plans. I think on top of that and what I already said, again, this financial disadvantage that we put young people who want to work, want to contribute to this community and country in every single way that they can, but we just financially penalise them. One of the things that we suggested through the Youth Homeless Chapter Collective was, okay, if young people get a lower rate for young people that don't have family support, who are either care experienced or have interacted with homelessness services, you could give them an independence payment that would just top them up to the same rate as everyone else, so they have the same tools. But I think that's an equalities thing, and what we actually need to see here is more equity. So looking at actually like actively going for black communities that are so underserved by these services and giving more rather than just the same as everyone else.
That's brilliant. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. I know Kim said that was the end. I do have one other question, which is around some of the recommendations that you have talked about there. They are all very sensible, particularly around anti-racism training, particularly around equity, about being proactive with underserved communities. There are an increasing number of local authorities for which that will fly in the face of their political direction. Have you seen any instances where the political direction further to the right has caused a worsening of the problems, or are you planning for how you deal and combat that challenge in the future?
Unfortunately, yes. We spend a lot of time at our service. We're a frontline service. We're a very findable service. We have a day centre. We've done a lot of active planning about what we would do if we were targeted. We do experience already, and have for a long time, but it's definitely got worse, a lot of online abuse to our staff about what we do, because we talk about being very proud to work with anyone who comes to our doors, no matter their background. We do have increased reports of people being harassed whilst forced to sleep rough, or in general just out and about. Again, we work with a group of asylum seekers and refugees who many of whom report absolutely staggering discrimination and abuse. And what we also see is people coming to London because they feel safer here, there's more community here, it's perceived as a safer space for them, and then they're not being that much of like a pathway or a model for people who feel they need to be in London for those reasons. And it's quite difficult sometimes to work with authorities to have a bit of flexibility around that. But yeah, I think the third sector in general is struggling, and are worried that we will face more and more of it.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all three of you. I really appreciate your time and your expertise, and I look forward to getting some of more of the evidence as well that you would start. Henri, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, just very quickly. I mean, from our perspective, we've already established a culturally specific project, and that project was set up through grant funding rather than through being funded through mainstream provision. And so for us, the conversation about the changing in the political landscape are something that are current, but our project was set up 2 years ago, where during a different landscape, where we were still facing some of the challenges that we're continuing to face today. So for me, I think recognizing that we recognized there was a gap at that time, which is 2 to 3 years ago. So politically, yeah, the climate has changed, but embedded within practice, regardless of which institution is in power, it's very much about whether or not practice and bias creates challenges and barriers for services. And as a Black-led organisation, we don't work exclusively with people of colour. We work with people really who are marginalised in society. But for me, I think recognising that it's not just these new challenges that we're facing, but there are existing challenges that institutions practice that create those challenges as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Danny.
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly add to that and your question. I think that finding a different way for black communities to complain when they've faced discrimination and would be a really good way to combat that, because then it's not left to the local authority and the housing services to kind of police themselves. Yeah. So that would go a long way, I think, with the question that you asked, in creating a robust way for people to complain separately.
Right. Thank you very, very much, all three of you. I've got the Minister waiting just there as well, which we'll be able to put some of the questions that you've raised here today. So thank you very much while we just change over panels.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I lost.
Yes, please. Thank you. Oh, cool. Welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee, Minister. We have on our second panel Alison McGovern, MP, Minister of State, Minister for Local Government and Homelessness as part of the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. We also have Philippa Davies, Director of Homelessness and Rough Sleeping at the Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government. Welcome to you both. You will have heard quite a lot of the discussion that we'd had in the first session, and I'm going to hand straight over to David.
Thank you very much, Minister. Thank you for coming, and Philippa, thank you for coming today. You will have heard a lot of this already through that session and maybe from your research as well, but black people are 4 times more likely to be homeless. Their black-led households are 12 times more likely to be living in temporary accommodation than white households, and twice as likely to be stuck in temporary accommodation for over 5 years than white households. So their families are less likely to secure social housing through the statutory system as well. So what evidence does the government have on why this situation exists? So, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Burton-Sampson. I really appreciate the opportunity to give evidence to you all as a committee. And it was also really good to listen to the contribution from Polly, Danielle and from Henri. I thought they did brilliantly. I'm terrified giving evidence to you all, so and I'm here all the time, so I don't know how they did it so brilliantly. Let me just you Mr. Burton-Sampson, you run through the data, and that's right. And we heard in the previous panel that there's a combination of structural causes, the sort of overriding causes of homelessness, not having enough money to pay for tenancy, being in a more fragile part of the labour market, not coming from a wealthy background, those structural causes, black people are more likely to be in a position where those affect them. I was really, really interested to listen to Danielle's testimony about what she'd experienced, because we also know, we all know anecdotally from our own life experience what people have told us. I've been a constituency MP for 15 and a half years now. And so we all know from what we've been told that there's probably direct discrimination as well, and we've heard it again. And there are some sources of evidence on that. The English Housing Survey has some evidence of increased expectation that people will be treated in a racist way. But I think it's fair to say that we could probably have more. So we know about the structural causes, that's clear in the data. We know that there is direct discrimination. It might be helpful if we had more. Is there anything that you want to add for that?
I think the only thing that I would add to that is we also have some limited, again, official data on people's experience when they are in the system. So we know that 45% of black rough sleepers don't know where to get support versus white rough sleepers who, for example, do have more awareness of that system. So there is a bit of evidence, but exactly as the Minister says, I think there is scope to go further.
Thank you. Thank you. Obviously, we've now got the homelessness plan in... Oh, sorry, did you?
Sorry, I just wanted to come back at that point, Philippa. Sorry, David. It's just the way that that was phrased. It was that white people will know more and black people will know less about where to get this. I think, is it that the fact that there is less knowledge, or is it that more of that information is actually targeted at a white audience?
I think that is an extremely fair question.
Is there any evaluation done on that at all?
I'm not aware that we have, but having a new homelessness strategy with some quite clear goals attached to it gives us the opportunity to find out.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, David.
That's fine.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And on that point, the new homelessness strategy, firstly, thank you and well done on getting that out there. I think it's a real positive that we've now got that strategy in place. However, the plan makes very few references to race, and the word racism only appears once in the whole 28,000 word document. So how will the plan, especially after what you've heard today, how will the plan start to address the racial disparities in homelessness risk and outcomes?
Thank you for that question. I think it's really helpful for this committee to take that lens over the strategy. The strategy kind of looks at those groups that are more likely to experience homelessness, and you'll see that there's a number of specific examples given where the government needs to work together through the duty to collaborate that we're suggesting to try to prevent that. I think it sort of comes back to the previous question you asked, in that our goals through the strategy are to increase prevention, so increase the incidences of homelessness where we're able to prevent that. You know, somebody saying, I think I might become homeless to their council. We want to increase the instances of where we're able to prevent that homelessness. We want to get families out of B&B accommodation and make that never happen unless it's really urgent, and to halve long-term rough sleeping. I think taking a race lens on those goals will, you know, we know through the data that will help support black people to have those goals and to make that happen. I think we need to make sure that we've got the data at hand to evidence that as we move forward in the delivery phase. So as we go through the next year and the year after, meeting those goals, to have the data to be able to say to ourselves, yes, we did tackle both the structural causes and the direct causes of the racism that we're seeing.
Thank you. And obviously, we can see that there's a disproportionate risk for black people here. So are there any parameters, targets or milestones to track progress in reducing the disproportionate risk that black people are faced at? And if there are, what are those measures?
So our goals are for overall levels of homelessness, but I would suggest that we ought to have transparency over the ethnicity data, try to improve the quality of that data, have it transparently available, and then work through our partners in local government to make sure that we deliver on closing that gap too. I'm very conscious that we've had ring fences mentioned, which I definitely want to come to and comment on, but there's other areas where, you know, a fairly significant proportion of homelessness arises through domestic abuse. And I know, you know, from the kind of grassroots organisations, the by and for organisations, how effective that can be in supporting people from different backgrounds. So we need to have transparency of the data and to improve the practice, and then as the years and months go on, to check back and make sure that we're closing that gap. Did you want to?
The only thing that I would add to that is, so the strategy does explicitly state that councils and public services must use lived experience and data to design accessible, inclusive, culturally sensitive services, which I appreciate goes wider than racism, but is really absolutely critical, I think, in responding to some of the stuff that we've heard today. So I think, as the Minister says, it would be a failure if our local plans in local areas didn't address some of the things that we talked about today.
Okay, great. So just to confirm, currently the plan doesn't look at this sort of level of data, but after what you've heard today, this is something you would be willing to take away.
I've sort of looked at the data we've got, and I think if the committee wanted to make recommendations on where you feel that improved data collection could be achieved, that would be really helpful.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, David. I'm going to hand over to Christine.
Thank you very much. And actually, you just touched on the very first thing I was going to ask you. We've talked about data and the importance of it and where there might be gaps. Are there specific gaps, you think, perhaps in public services, local government, collecting data with regards to race and homelessness that's not being gathered already and you would like to see?
I might bring you in, Philippa, on that, because I think MHCLG is obviously responsible for the kind of national level statistics. There's always a tension when you're working with local government where delivery is at the forefront. You want to make data as easy to collect as possible, but as high quality as we can. So I will want to kind of work with them on that. Is there anything specific you want to add?
I think absolutely with that lens, because we recognise there's a real balance here between asking for too much and asking for too little. The areas that, having reviewed the work of the committee so far, I think we've really thought about are breakdowns within the overall black households sort of signifier, which we can't do very well at the moment. The questions about intersectionality that you've talked about today, where again, we're not yet able to break down to that level of nuance. And then I think hidden homelessness was reflected a bit earlier in the committee. And again, by want of it being hidden, our data on hidden homelessness is just not as rich as it could be. But obviously all balance, as the Minister says, with burdens on local government and not expecting too much that just becomes a barrier to service delivery.
The Interministerial Group on Homelessness and Rough Sleeping, the government has said in the plan it's a whole government effort, the strategy, and there's various ministers on it, including MHCLG, Home Office, DFE, DWP, DHFC, the MOD and the MOJ, the Treasury and the Cabinet Office. Minister, you already mentioned the impact of domestic abuse and the role that it unfortunately plays. I wonder if it's been considered including the Minister for Women and Equalities in the Interministerial Group on Homelessness.
Thank you, Ms. Jardine, for that question. I mean, I'm tempted to say it's not an exclusive invite, so before Christmas I was part of a group of ministers that brought forward the child poverty strategy, obviously this homelessness strategy, and also the strategy on violence against women and girls. And I think it was very important that those strategies spoke to each other, because actually many of the underlying challenges that each of them are trying to address are similar. And the reason why I mention that is because I have worked very closely with some ministers in other departments to try to bring those different lenses to the homelessness strategy. So obviously I've worked very closely with Jess Phillips and Alex Davies-Jones from a kind of violence against women and girls perspective, to really try to help them with what they wanted to achieve in that very important strategy, but also make sure that their insights were used by us in CLG in getting the homelessness strategy right. And I give one example of that, where Jess and I worked very closely together to try and make sure that we would get the right guidance for local authorities in support for people experiencing domestic abuse. So I would be very happy for Women and Equalities Minister to come along, but I feel that in the group of ministers that we've had work on each of those three interconnecting strategies, and I would also give a mention to Steph Peacock and the youth strategy as well, I feel that in the group of ministers who have collaborated on those strategies, that we've got people with good knowledge and experience, but as I say, far be it from me to shun any of my colleagues.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Nia.
Thank you very much, and nice to see you, Minister. Perhaps following on from that, you work well with your colleagues, but can you tell us a little bit more about how the planned legal duties on public services to identify and collaborate and address the issues of homelessness will actually work in practice out in the field?
Yeah. Thanks, Dave Griffiths, for that question. We know that there are some big, significant barriers to getting people the right help and support at the right time. And in my former ministerial life in DWP, I saw this in reality, when we were trying to make sure that people were able to get access to universal credit easily and swiftly, and that the information could be shared with, for example, local authorities so that they could offer important support. So the duty to collaborate is really about making sure that there aren't artificial institutional barriers that might get in the way. And the idea is to kind of shift from a sort of passive system to an active one where we expect people to really work together. That will lead to our prevention goal being achieved if we get it right. Because I think it was Polly who said in the previous session that we know that if we can get young people the right help at an early stage, that we can stop them experiencing homelessness throughout their life, and how valuable that is. And I think the duty to collaborate there, particularly thinking about young people, shows how valuable that would be. And so it's about shifting from passive, here's information, to active, duty to collaborate, with the simple objective of preventing homelessness. Is there anything you want to add from a legal point of view?
Only that we've got plenty to work through. So we'll build on the duty to refer, which was introduced in 2018. The Minister says it's a bit more passive. You have to refer, but there is no duty then on you to try and do your best to prevent the homelessness that you found. So we'll build on that. We've got some work to do internally in government, but we will come forward with proposals as soon as we can.
And Chair, if I may, it comes back to your point earlier about whose responsibility is it? Well, it's clearly the state's responsibility to make sure that its support is active and giving people, the right to a roof over their head in reality, not just kind of in theory.
Question that I would want to ask is, and it comes to the last question that I asked at the last panel really, is what happens when you have local authorities and devolved powers that do not wish to comply on this. For example, we have the mayor of Great Lincolnshire, who has proudly said that they are anti-woke, who has proudly pushed back on saying that we're going to sack equality and diversity officers. I doubt that they will very much be offering anti-racism training for their council officers. And I think that comes to the Henri's point about what happens with devolved transitions. How are we going to ensure that what we need to see happen actually is delivered on the ground?
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I do think this is a really important question. It's why there are national goals. And as I said to Mr. Burton-Sampson, that's why there has to be goals and transparency and clarity. I find it profoundly disappointing, the idea that ending homelessness might be in any way party political. I can think of people, not from my party, the Labour Party, who did good things and who are still in the House and do great things on ending homelessness. I find it really disappointing, the idea that anyone might think that what's in the government's homelessness strategy is somehow so political that they couldn't sign up to it. And I think what I've heard from local authority leaders up and down the country of different political stripes is that they believe in the potential of particularly our children stuck in temporary accommodation, or people who've been sleeping rough for a very long time. And I don't think that is, I don't think anyone should disparage that. And I think it will be extremely disappointing if people from, whatever political background, want to make disparaging remarks about what we're trying to achieve.
And is there any, I guess, there's plenty of carrot, is there any stick from the department when it comes to devolved powers and local authorities reaching those targets and shared goals?
Well, we're coming from a position in local authorities, particularly where they have been significantly underfunded, where deprivation wasn't recognised in the funding system properly, and we've changed that. So I think we need to move to the new system of funding, and so that we re-establish that connection between deprivation and council funding, and help support colleagues to help us meet our goals. I take your point, but I think we're not quite in the right place to be thinking about that at the moment.
I'm just a really pessimistic person, Minister.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm
such
a cynic.
But if you look at, I had the great pleasure of going to Hackney with Mayor Sadiq Khan to see some of the work that he was doing as we launched some of the investment for the strategy. I've spent many hours of my life listening to Andy Burnham talking about his work on homelessness, and it's excellent. So I have hope.
I'm glad. We like to have hope in our committee. Nia, did you have any more? Yes.
Yes.
Sorry.
I mean, sadly, we have heard of some dreadful examples of treatment of black people, even by local authority housing officers. And so really, I'd like to ask you about what plans there are to actually set up racially informed cultural competency training, firstly for the people who are actually setting the social policies, but much more broadly than that, the people who are actually supposed to be implementing it, and then what monitoring, which links in with the Chair's last question, might there be of that in practice?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Davies. On the monitoring point, it just comes back to the point that I was saying before. We've got some exacting targets to meet, and we keep a close eye on what's going on in every local authority area. Homelessness and temporary accommodation is concentrated in particular places, so we monitor it very closely, and as part of the homelessness strategy, we committed to update Parliament regularly in the usual way, so we will be monitoring it. Perhaps on training and so on, I might ask Philippa to talk about the competence and conduct standard that we're working on, which arose from work that the previous government did, which arose from Grenfell. Do you want to just...
Yes, I'm very happy to. So in the case of social housing providers and the management of social housing providers, we are bringing in a standard set of requirements to ensure that their housing management staff have the skills, knowledge, experience in order to properly serve the populations that they're serving. And our policy statement around that has been really clear that this must include equalities and diversity, awareness of need, vulnerabilities. So it picks up some of the points in the social housing system specifically that we've already talked about today. That comes in October this year. It will be kept under review, evaluated by 2028. So that is one real step to improving competency and conduct within the social housing system itself. I think the other bit that I would just pull out is, as part of the homelessness strategy, we committed £12 million to a new national workforce programme, so not for social housing providers but for people working in homelessness services, both in the voluntary sector and in the statutory sector. This can be used on training, including anti-racism training. And just as one example, this year we funded Shelter to deliver training on supporting homeless migrants, and as part of that there was an explicit focus on anti-racism. So I would expect a similar use for that programme going forwards.
Thank you, Nia. I'm going to come to you. got 2 for 1 here in terms of chairs. I'm really delighted to have the Women and Equalities Committee.
Lucky day.
Yeah. To have the chair from CLG, Select Committee, Florence Eschlomi. Florence.
Thank you, Chair. Just wanted to ask Minister and Philippa if you had sight of the shelter reports that came out last year. My colour speaks before me. I had the opportunity to attend a launch back in July and meet with some of the participants on that report. And it details the racism in social housing, which, according to that report, is deeply embedded in policy and practice. It also lists a number of recommendations in terms of addressing this, and I'm glad to hear some of the announcements you've just made, Philippa. One of the recommendations was around all local authority staff, including in allocation and planning and housing strategy, should be required to publicly publish and report complaints on racial discrimination, and that this report can be anonymised. Is this something that the Ministry would probably look at?
Thank you, Chair. I think that's a really important point, and Shelter's research obviously informs a lot of our work. We're reviewing allocations, and I will take that suggestion as an option for something we would want to do in the future.
Thank you, Florence. Nadia.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister, for all your time so far. The government's plan makes no mention of unfreezing local housing allowance, except to say that it's under review. Given that black-led households are more likely to claim LHA, would raising LHA help to address the racial disparities in homelessness risk?
Thank you, Ms. Fidderman. I think social security has a really important role to play in this. We spoke at the beginning of this session about the structural causes of homelessness, where we see that black people are more likely to have lower income, and that just means they're more likely to experience homelessness. You'll know that the government took some significant steps on social security at the budget, not least removing the 2-child limit, which will have a positive effect. On local housing allowance specifically, we know that the government is forecast to spend significant amounts more on housing benefits overall. And we talked a bit about social housing in this session, and I'm very keen that we deliver on the 39 billion commitment to increase the amount of social housing, because I think, again, it was said by Danielle and by Polly how much, and I think by Henri as well, actually, that we haven't invested enough in social housing. If we're able to do that, then that should have a positive effect for people. The challenge we have is, is the private rented sector really delivering for people in a way that is, affordable, acceptable, and I think we all know that it hasn't been. That's why we've introduced the Renters' Rights Bill. So we need to do all of those things, and as we've said, keep LHA under review. I know it's a really challenging situation for people, and I want to see that social housing built, enable more people to get into a really good tenancy that's affordable for them.
I appreciate the range of things that the government is doing on this, but the freezing of local housing allowance is one of the main factors driving the crisis in temporary accommodation. According to Crisis, after years of freezes by successive governments, only 2.7% of homes in Great Britain today would be affordable for people relying on housing benefit. So we know that black-led households are more likely to claim LHA. They're significantly overrepresented in temporary accommodation, and they're more likely to stay there for longer. Is it the view of the department that these things aren't linked? Because Shelter says that they are.
It is definitely my view that social security has an impact on, a significant impact on people's incomes, and that the cause of homelessness is not having enough money to be able to afford a roof over your head. the question is, what do you do about it? And I want to build more social homes because that not only enables people to have often an affordable tenancy, but there's also quality issues there, and the security of tenancy. We also want to improve the quality of the private rented sector as we do it, and we'll keep the LHA under review.
Thank you, Nadia. Florence.
Thank you, Chair. One of the areas we are looking at on the Housing, Communities and Local Government Select Committee is conditions of homes, and you referenced the private rented sector. Big issues in terms of the state of the homes and also the state of homes in the social rented sector. A number of people are unable to move because of the LHA rate has still been frozen. And again, following on from Nadia's question, data from Crisis shows that 34% of black households rent privately. A number of them will rely on LHA. An EIA quality impact assessment from the DWP back in 2022 found that people from BME backgrounds are more likely to be impacted by the decision not to increase LHA rates. So again, just coming back to that question in terms of what additional work has been led and being carried out in the department to look at the impact of specifically freezing the LHA and the disproportionate impact it could be having on BME communities in the private rented sector and in the social housing sector.
Thank you, Chair. And I just want to say, as a sort of caveat to what I'm about to say, that obviously the renters' rights reforms and so on are the direct responsibility of the Housing Minister, who I'm sure you've had before your committee many times, who will have talked about the importance of those changes to renters' rights and giving people more power in the system. We hope will help them to be able to get, be treated better in tenancies and so on. When it comes to LHA, I really sort of repeat what I've said, which is that I know the impact that social security has. We have an increasing bill forecast for the government on housing benefits, and we need to make sure that we keep it under review to make sure that the social security system is effective in preventing people from getting into not just poverty but deep poverty that they can't escape from. And I'll be working with colleagues in DWP and other departments to, as we go through the homelessness strategy, to try to make sure that we've got the policies in place to achieve the goals that we set.
Would one of those things be working with colleagues in DWP to break down the data and people who are receiving LHA by ethnicity? My understanding is that that data is not currently available or it's not collected.
I will happily do that.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Does anybody else have any other questions at all? No? Thank you very much. We're on wind-ups now, so there will be votes soon. Thank you so much, Minister and Philippa, for your time. Best brings this session to a close. Order, order.